Okay, I think we're going to get going. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nils Ringe. I'm a professor of political science and the director of the Jean Monnet European Union Center of Excellence at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you all for being here bright and early for our breakfast briefing on ranked choice voting. Unfortunately, we have not yet figured out how to actually offer breakfast on Zoom. So I can only hope that you've gotten your coffee and donuts some other way. I'm very pleased to welcome you all and to offer a particularly warm welcome to our speakers, Lee Drutman, Andrea Benjamin, Amy Fried, and David Farrell, who will offer lessons and insights on ranked choice voting and how it might work in Wisconsin. This event is co-sponsored by WisPolitics.com and then several units on the UW-Madison campus, the Jean Monnet EU Center, the Elections Research Center, the Thompson Center on Public Leadership, the Follette School of Public Affairs, and the Department of Political Science. We're very grateful for their support. And I would also like to thank Levi Bankston at the Elections Research Center for handling most of the logistics for this event. And I'm now going to actually very quickly turn it over to our moderator, Mike Wagner, who's a professor in the University of Wisconsin-Madison's School of Journalism and Mass Communication. His research, teaching, and service are animated by the question, how does democracy work, which he approaches from a variety of different perspectives and academic disciplines. Thank you, Mike, for leading us through the program today. And thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Nils, and good morning, everyone. Welcome out there in virtual Zoom land. We are very happy to have a terrific panel here for you today. We're going to hear from each panelist for about 10 minutes, where they'll offer their perspective about ranked choice voting, and sometimes putting it in a broader context of democratic reform, sometimes looking at a specific country or a set of actors. And it'll, I think, be a really useful way to kind of kick off our discussion after everybody presents. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then also I'll monitor the chat feature on Zoom that many of you are probably pretty familiar with by now, and also try to pick questions that are coming from all of you as well. And we'll go until about 9:15 and hopefully have a robust conversation about a really important potential reform to how we engage in democratic elections and the maintenance of our democratic republic. Our first presenter is Lee Drutman. He's a senior fellow in the political reform program at New America. He's the author of Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, The Case for Multi-Party Democracy in America. I recommend this book. It is a wonderful read and a rich set of arguments. He's also the author of The Business of America is Lobbying. You don't need to take my word for the quality of that book, as it won the 2016 American Political Science Association's Robert A. Dahl Award, given for scholarship of the highest quality on the subject of democracy. He's also the co-host of the podcast Politics in Question and writes for the New York Times, Vox, 538, among other outlets. Thank you for being here, Lee, and take it away.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation. I think this is an incredibly important moment in our political history in which we are starting to think about some really big reforms to our democracy, ranked choice voting being among them. And I want to frame the conversation a little bit by putting the challenges of American democracy on the table. And when we think about political reform, I think we also need to ask the question of what is the problem that we are trying to solve? I think this is really a very precarious moment in American democracy right now. The basic foundation of democracy, a shared faith in the electoral process, is fundamentally under attack. I think we're in a moment in which both Democrats and Republicans believe that the other party is challenging the basic foundation of free and fair elections, with very different views on what free and fair elections are. But it's very hard to have a democracy in which two sides don't agree on the basic rules of what free and fair elections are. And there are a number of reasons for this, what some scholars call pernicious polarization. But I think at the core of it is the way that our party system has divided along urban versus rural lines, which also count sort of stack other identities around cultural divides, around racial and ethnic divides, personally around educational divides and economic divides. And with very little overlap. And in many ways, I think Wisconsin is a extremely paradigmatic state, an example of this process is this dynamic that is nationwide, in which Wisconsin has a few very liberal cities that account for roughly half the population, and a lot of very conservative, small and rural places that account for roughly half of the competition. So Wisconsin is very close statewide, but almost all state legislative elections for the state legislature are incredibly lopsided. About 95% of incumbents are regularly reelected. Fewer than 10% of state legislative assembly races are genuinely competitive. Many seats are not even contested, and it's gone on for many decades. Moreover, the Wisconsin state legislature is extremely gerrymandered so that Republicans could win a majority of seats in 2018, despite losing the popular vote, although they did win the popular vote in 2020 for state legislative seats. Although interestingly, they actually improved their vote share, but they won fewer seats, which tells you how odd the dynamic is. And Wisconsin is a very competitive 2020 gubernatorial race and a close swing state. And voting rights are at the center of politics in Wisconsin, as in many other places. So I put this on the table because I think it's important to understand that this is the fundamental challenge of our democracy, and I think it's tremendously exacerbated by the two-party system with single member winner-take-all districts. Now, RCV, ranked choice voting, is a reform that has been gaining, I think, a tremendous amount of steam. And for those who don't know how it works, there's two forms: the single winner and the multi-winner form. It's easier to explain to newcomers in the single winner form, which is that people rank their candidates in order of preference. And then candidates are eliminated bottom up. As candidates are eliminated, votes are transferred to voters' backup or second choice. And the process stops when one candidate achieves a majority of votes. It could be after the first round, after the second round. In the multi-winner proportional form, which I know David Farrell will talk more about because that's what's used in Ireland, it involves a little bit more of a complicated transfer process, but the basic voter experience is the same. Voters get to rank their candidates in order of preference. And I think ranked choice voting is a definite improvement over the plurality voting system. I think it has a number of very attractive qualities. One is that it gives voters the ability to rank their preferences and to have more choice. It encourages broader coalition building, allows voters to signal a wide range of preferences and for candidates to compete for those preferences, make some space for third parties, and prevents votes from for third parties being spoiler. But if you vote for a third party, your vote gets transferred to one of the major parties, which encourages more competition. And I think the experiences from states and particularly cities that have used ranked choice voting has been broadly that it does encourage a more civil style of campaigning, less negative campaigning. Voters tend to like it very much, and once voters learn about it, they find it pretty simple and straightforward to use. Now, my take on American politics right now, is that the fundamental challenge is that we have this binary two-party system that is divided along urban versus rural lines, in which two parties view each other as fundamental threats. So the question is, can ranked choice voting do something about that? And I think it can. But I think it can only do that in the multi-winner proportional form. I think that so far we've used single winner ranked choice voting, which preserves the single member district. And as long as the single member district is preserved, the ability of multiple parties to compete remains pretty limited. And I think one of the advantages of the multi-winner form of ranked choice voting is that it allows parties to compete everywhere for votes. So suddenly parties on the left can compete for votes in the rural conservative parts of the country, where there are some voters who might vote for parties of the left or the Democratic Party. There are similarly, the Republicans parties on the right might compete for voters in the city, whereas in the current system of single member districts, you wind up with basically, half of the, well, actually even more than half of the seats in Wisconsin are safe for the Republicans, and a little less than half are safe for the Democrats. And so you're not going to wind up with too much of an impact if you use single winner. But multi-winner, suddenly you open the space for more parties, and every vote matters. I mean, rather than most voters voting in elections that are predetermined and sort of not going to be particularly engaged, you have a much more broadly competitive process. And so now there's another thing I want to address briefly, because this is part of the Wisconsin ranked choice voting proposal. Sorry, I'm being I'm having a child interruption here. My kids school is closed today in Washington D.C. So then there's the issue of the primary, which is another part of the Wisconsin Final Five voting proposal to combine open top five primaries with ranked choice voting. And the idea is that when elections are lopsided for one party or the other, the primary becomes the determinant, and so primary voters tend to be more partisan than general election voters. And so opening up the primary would potentially create more space for a wider range of candidates to run. And I think this is, in theory, this seems like it should work. But however, I want to raise a couple of caveats I think we ought to discuss. Now, one is I've done a very deep dive on the research into open primaries and closed primaries and all manner of primary reform. And it turns out that primary type doesn't seem to make that much of a difference in terms of the candidates that get elected. And it turns out, although there is a perception that primary voters are more extreme, when you actually look at the survey data, primary voters tend to be pretty similar to general election voters. And the biggest difference is, of course, between voters who support Democrats and voters who support Republicans. Certainly it's possible that opening up the primaries might generate more candidates, broader ideological range. But in practice, most candidates want to run in elections that they think they can win. And within the single member district, if there are candidates who are not really in tune with very conservative or very liberal districts, as most districts are, there's not going to be a ton of incentive to run. Moreover, there's not going to be a ton of money and party support for these candidates to win. Generally, my view is that if we want to expand the number of parties, and I think we do, I think we want to break the binary that is at the heart of so many of our problems, particularly as the parties are split along rural and urban lines. I think that the key to doing that is to have multi-winner ranked choice voting, or basically the Irish system, which David will talk more about. Now, I will say that there are certain statewide races that are inherently single winner, notably senator and governor, in which you can't do a proportional form of ranked choice voting. And in those cases, I think that the ranked choice voting plus the top 5 nonpartisan primary is actually the best solution. And I think those are races that are high profile enough that you'll get lots of media attention for all the candidates, and also high are incredibly attractive to a lot of candidates running who might not want to run for congressional districts or state legislative districts. So I think those are cases where the top 5 with ranked choice voting makes sense. But for state legislative, state senate, and congressional districts, I think the truly transformative reform would be multi-winner proportional elections with ranked choice voting, which gets you a system in which every voter matters, in which parties are going to appeal to candidates everywhere, and which you have a chance of really getting a much more ideological diversity, as well as other forms of diversity candidates. And I think that's the thing that can potentially break the binary, this really pernicious urban versus rural divide in our politics. So I look forward to hearing what my co-panelists have to say, and really excited to dig into this deeper. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee, for that great kickoff. Our second presenter today is Andrea Benjamin. She's an associate professor in the Clara Luper Department of African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Her research interests include race and politics, local elections and voting behavior, and public opinion, so a perfect match for what we're doing today. She is the author of the terrific book, Racial Coalition Building in Local Elections, Elite Cues and Cross-Ethnic Voting, which you can get from Cambridge University Press. And she also is, of course, an author of several articles and book chapters in the areas of her research interests. So, Professor Benjamin, great to have you here, and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Lee did cover one thing I was going to cover, so I will just jump right in. So I'm going to be talking about the New York City Democratic primary, which took place in June of this year. And I think people are focused on this election because obviously it's the largest group of voters that were allowed to use ranked choice voting to date. While some states have used it, they're pretty small. And obviously I will just make a caveat that no city is New York City. So I think there are some good lessons to learn here. But of course, where I live, if I were to say anything about New York City, everyone around me would say, but we're not New York City. So I do want to keep that in mind. So I have run exit polls myself before, but I didn't run this exit poll, but Common Cause New York and Rank the Vote New York City contracted with Edison to get some exit poll data in June. It ran from June 12th to June 22nd. Obviously there was early voting, there was, I think, mail-in voting, and then the election was June 22nd. So let me just give some overall top lines, which I think might answer some questions that people have in the chat. And then I'll get to the specifics more related to my research about why I think there are some good lessons for us to learn from the New York Democratic primary that use ranked choice voting. And then I'll offer likely some concerns that I have. So according to this Edison research, this exit poll, 83% of voters ranked at least 2 candidates on their ballots in the primary. 42% of voters maximized, so they ranked all 5 candidates. It is true that New Yorkers did seem to understand the way the ballots worked. I know that they put a large educational campaign, obviously moving from sort of one person, one vote model to the ranked choice voting. There is a concern that maybe people will get confused and mark 8 candidates instead of 5. So, they really spent a lot of time, I think, and a lot of on the ground organizations, grassroots organizations also ran educational campaigns. when asked about it, 51% ranked because it allowed them to vote their values, right? So similar to what Lee was saying, maybe they liked 2 candidates or they had shared issues with 3 candidates, they're allowed to rank them. 49% ranked because it allowed them to support multiple candidates, and 41% ranked because it gave them more of a say in who gets elected, right? So as Lee explained, New York did a basic RCV where, you know, the lowest vote getter was dropped and then your second choice was allocated, right? 95% of the voters found their ballot simple to complete. And I think that number is really important because as someone who studies local elections, they can already be really low turnout. They can sort of be weird. They're not on cycle. Who thinks about an election in June? And so we really want to make sure that voters feel like they're able to complete the ballot without mistake so that their vote doesn't get lost. And then 78% of New Yorkers in the sample said that they understood ranked choice voting extremely well or very well. And again, I think that's such a good number. I think one thing that I was interested in is sort of how do racial and ethnic minorities use these ballots? You know, there are lots of concerns. There's a lot of research about sort of where ballot expiration, exhaustion, you know, mistakes come. And so across all voters, 42% again ranked 5 candidates, but 43% of Black voters ranked 5 candidates, 40% of Latinx voters ranked 5 candidates, 45% of white voters ranked 5 candidates, and 33% of Asian voters ranked 5 candidates, right? So people seem to be using the ballots. It made sense to them. There wasn't a lot of problems. Black, Latinx, and Asian voters were more likely to say that they ranked in the mayoral primary because it allowed them to vote their values. Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters were more likely to say they ranked in the mayoral primary because it allowed them to support multiple candidates. So again, I think that they, you know, they really liked this ability to sort of pick and choose. For me, again, sort of getting into my research, I was very interested in this race because obviously it generated a diverse set of candidates. So there were multiple Black candidates, both men and women. There was a Black Latino woman, a Latina woman, 2 Asian American men. And perhaps more importantly, when it got to the final rounds, right, those final rounds, the top 3 voters were a Black man, Eric Adams, a Black woman, Maya Wiley, and a Latina woman, Catherine Garcia. And just thinking historically, while the Democratic primary, I mean, sometimes I think about this and, you know, I tell my students all the time, New York hasn't really had a diverse set of mayors, right? We can actually, the only non-white mayor is David Dinkins in the 90s, right? And so when we think about, oh my gosh, New York is so diverse, it clearly must generate all these really diverse mayors. That's not true. And so I think this is a, you know, just a really important time because of course it looks like they will elect their only 2nd Black mayor in the history of the city. So I think that's really important. And it's not to say that there weren't diverse candidates in the past, right? We can think about, when we think about sort of recent elections, 2013, you know, actually earlier than that, right? So Fernando Ferrer obviously ran for mayor of New York City. He went pretty far in the primary against Green in 2001, didn't make it. Obviously faced Bloomberg in 2005, could not beat him, which of course that was a hard test case anyways. But we can think about 2009, Bill Thompson. Bill Thompson challenged de Blasio for the primary in 2013, didn't make it. So it's not that and even in the 2013 primary, there were women, Christine Quinn, Lou was a candidate or an Asian American male, right? So it's not that there haven't been a diverse set of candidates vying to be mayor of New York City. They just couldn't make it to that final piece and be elected. And so in that sense, that's really important to me, just thinking about that diversity of candidates. But more importantly, what I think is maybe to some people's question is what did it do for turnout? So I was able to pull the data. Hopefully this is accurate. Obviously some of this is old, but in 2013, the Democratic primary saw a 20% turnout rate, 13% overall when we include Republicans. And during the general election that year, voter turnout was 24%. In 2017, recall that election wasn't competitive. De Blasio was obviously going to be reelected. He won 74% of the vote, and the Democratic primary then was 15% the turnout, and the overall turnout was 25%. So already in 2021, during this Democratic primary, voter turnout was 25% overall, 20% in the Democratic side, sorry, and when we include Republicans, it was 20%. And we're still waiting, obviously, to see what happens in the general election next month, but 25% is still higher than 15% in 2017, and even higher than the 20% in the primary in 2013. And so I think these are all things that I really care about, right? So I agree with Lee that, there is a lot of opportunities, and obviously electing a mayor, we can't go multi-member there. There's only one mayor. But I think that increase in a diverse set of candidates, perhaps that mobilizes voters. Each of those candidates, because it's not so clear that, that you could sort of campaign and say, if you pick me number one, pick this person number two, there could be some coalition building. Each candidate is also running their own voter registration drives likely, and their get out the vote campaigns. I think it's an opportunity to bring issues to the forefront. But I'm not, I'm agnostic. I don't live in New York City, but I think given the last year and a half, and if anybody, I gave a quote a couple weeks ago for a reporter, and I feel bad because it was true, I did say it, but in the last year and a half, it's not lost on me that New York City they are, slated to elect another Black mayor who's also a police officer. And so this idea that it would lead to some sort of police reform, I feel like it's really unlikely. And so even though there were candidates more to the left asking for reform, again, I can't speak to what New York City wants from their mayorship or from their police force, but it isn't, I think that sometimes when we talk about RCV, it's presented as, that's just some super leftist thing that people are going to come and it's just going to be wild out here. And I think New York City, which again, in our minds is, sort of this very wild place, right? It seems so progressive. It seems so liberal, so diverse. It must be this way. For them to still pick a pretty moderate Black guy, right, to be their choice is still just a reminder that, elections and electoral rules can only control so much. So even as we sort of zoom out away from the city, I think that reform is necessary, but I think that there are other things that will have to be fixed. So when we think about congressional elections, I think no amount of electoral reform will change the fact that our districts are gerrymandered. And so I live in Oklahoma. I don't care what reform we bring here, there's not going to be a final 5 Democrats in Oklahoma. That's not going to happen, even in my district, which did elect a Democrat a few years ago. So I will leave it at that. And I'm really excited about the conversation. I'm excited about the questions, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Benjamin, for that wonderful set of orienting comments. Our next presenter is Amy Freed, the John Mitchell Nickerson Professor of Political Science at the University of Maine, where her research primarily concerns public opinion, particularly the history and political uses of public opinion in the United States. She's the author of Muffled Echoes, Oliver North and the Politics of Public Opinion from Columbia University Press, Pathways to Polling, Crisis Cooperation, and the Making of Public Opinion Professions from Routledge Press, and just has published an interesting and provocative new book with Douglas Harris, At War with Government, How Conservatives Weaponize Distrust from Goldwater to Trump. She also writes a biweekly column and an intermittent blog for the Bangor Daily News. Professor Freed, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm very happy to be here and to talk about Maine's experience with ranked choice voting, and along the way, perhaps think of some of the challenges and lessons and contributions of this experience. And I did put together some slides, so I'll share those. That's my little intro there. So Maine's experience with ranked choice voting, I'd say, has been affected by 2 main sorts of elements of the state. First is the tradition of independence. This is a young Senator Angus King when he was elected governor. Angus King in 1994, coming in with a plurality win with 4 candidates. The third candidate, by the way, was Susan Collins, then running for governor, of course, as a Republican. And although it's unusual to have an independent governor, his plurality win was by no means anything novel in Maine, because from 1994 to 2018, the most recent gubernatorial election, 5 out of the 7 gubernatorial wins were in fact plurality. So we have a long history of that. And another indication of the independence of our state, the state of Maine, is that the largest number of voters, the plurality of voters, are registered independents, or what we call unenrolled voters. It's also a very participatory state with a lot of good government reforms. And I think that was somewhat of an impetus to taking a look at ranked choice voting and adopting it. Let's see. Okay, so the other element is partisanship. Unfortunately, we know, the country has become highly polarized around partisanship, and that was certainly true when it came to ranked choice voting. It still is true somewhat in the state. So when the election results in 2018, the Maine 2nd District race were certified by Governor LePage. He wrote on it, I don't know if you could see next to his initials, stolen election. So it was, sort of cast in this way. And it's unfortunate because ranked choice voting really can, lead to all kinds of people being elected, Democrats and Republicans. And, you look at the experience of places that have had it for a long time, that's certainly true. And that partisanship has also shown up in voter attitudes, in the use of it by Democrats versus Republicans. Democrats see it more positively, use it more often, and then also in some of the litigation and legislation. So let's see, I can't forward this for some, okay, here we go. So how did ranked choice come to be passed? Well, first of all, there was some early interest going back to 2001 with good government groups. And then I will certainly acknowledge that there was an impetus from the plurality wins of Governor LePage, the first one being with less than 40% of the vote. This was the three-way race with a Democrat, an independent, and LePage. So both of those things really had an impetus in leading it to be passed. It was ultimately adopted at the ballot box. So there were two different referenda. It was passed in November 2016 with about 52% of the vote for ranked choice voting. However, there was then a constitutional ruling saying that it did not apply to certain races. So the Maine state constitution talks about elections via plurality. And so the ruling said that for state races, state general election races, you could not use ranked choice voting. It can be used for state primary races, but it can't be used for general election races for state offices, but it can be used for federal offices. Then the legislature passed something known as delay and repeal, which held up ranked choice voting until a future time when there could be a change in the Constitution to allow it. But then the court ruled that it could be used going forward for the upcoming primary in 2018. Then on the same day that that primary was held, that the court had allowed, there was a vote again on ranked choice voting. Maine has something called a people's veto, which allows voters to go out, gather signatures to overturn something that has been passed by the legislature, and it puts it on hold. So people were going to vote in the primary, which used ranked choice voting. So it's allowed to be used for ranked choice. And then they were also voting whether to keep it. And you can see there was a small increase from roughly 52% to 54% support for ranked choice voting. So it has been used going forward for the races for which it's allowed. Okay, so in 2018, then it was used in these primaries. Janet Mills, currently the governor of the state of Maine, won her primary after a series of rankings. It was a 7-person race. So she went forward. It was also used in the 2nd congressional district primary. And then it was used in the general elections. As I said, it can only be used for federal offices in the general election, and it was used in the 2nd congressional district, where Poliquin, the incumbent, had a plurality of the vote, 46% to Golden's 45%, 45.5%. But then once the rankings were done, Golden won with 50.53%. Okay. And that was, rather controversial. Now, one of the issues I think to keep in mind, which perhaps we'll talk about in the Q&A, is the whole question of implementation. It was, since it got adopted in the sort of late sort of situation right before the 2018 primaries, a bit of a challenge to do implementation. The fellow, by the way, all the way on the right was then Maine's Secretary of State, Matt Dunlap. And he had to develop, and the office had to develop the rules to be used for counting, and also the procedures to be used for counting. In a time that it was very politically controversial, and also where there wasn't a lot of money that had been really available. So he had to find ways to make this work. And one of the main issues is that he had to figure out how to secure the ballots, because the first round of voting was happening in municipalities by the town clerks. But then if there was no majority winner, only, then those ballots had to go through the set of ranked choice tallies. So he had to find a way to transfer all of those ballots, either directly with paper ballots or on memory sticks, to the state capitol. And he worked on that quite a lot. Now, another thing that was important, I think, for implementation is that he also did a lot of voter education. The Secretary of State's office took some of that on, and he himself had this cute little video, which you can find if you go through YouTube and look for it, where he explained how ranked choice voting works. So the Secretary of State's office was very much of an honest broker in trying to make all of this work, and did it under, in some ways, very difficult circumstances. Okay, after the 2018 election, the incumbent Bruce Poliquin in the Maine 2nd Congressional District challenged ranked choice voting in federal court, although he did lose all of those lawsuits. This is him on the left. This is the current incumbent who beat him, Jared Golden, on the right. It was then extended by the legislature, ranked choice, to presidential elections in the state of Maine. And then there was another lawsuit brought up to try to dismiss it prior to the 2020 elections by some GOP plaintiffs, and it was dismissed by the judge, a federal judge. So it's continued to be somewhat controversial. There was also an attempt to gather signatures to try to get rid of it, but there were not enough signatures to place that referendum on the ballot. Okay, so this, I think, is really kind of the meat of this discussion, hopefully, which is going forward, which is, has RCV lived up to its promises in Maine? And the things that we were told would happen was that it would produce majority winners, decrease money in politics, and increase civility. And well, certainly it has, when it's been in use, created, majorities. There have been, you don't have these plurality winners in the races in which it ended up being used, because there was a whole series of rankings. So, although certainly the people who oppose it say that these are not real majorities, that's their claim, because you have some people who don't rank all of the candidates. Has it decreased money in politics? I don't think so. I think there's been plenty of very high buck races. Certainly the 2020 Senate race with Susan Collins and others was a very, very expensive race. The congressional race to come in the 2nd district is going to be very expensive. It's one of the few competitive, really truly competitive races in the country. So I don't think it's decreased money in politics. Has it increased civility? In some ways, yes, in some situations, and probably more in primaries than other. And this little image is of two of the candidates who ran in the 2018 gubernatorial primary, the Democratic gubernatorial primary, who actually cross-endorsed each other. So, they were saying, you ranked me first and him second, or him first, me, her first, me second. I think when it comes to primaries, that's true. Maybe in the 2018 congressional race, the general election, for all of the candidates, except for Bruce Pollock, when the Republican incumbent, they were extremely civil towards each other. But overall, I don't think we've had a huge amount of increase in civility. To some extent, yes, but not completely. But it has at least, produced these majority winners. And hopefully going forward, it will have less of a partisan sensibility. I think it will actually take a Republican winning through ranked choice for that to happen. But at this point, because it's association with Democrats and having the Democrat win from ranked choice in the congressional race, it still has that sort of tone to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for that informative and visually interesting look through Maine over the last few years. Our final presenter before we get to a panel discussion and some of your questions is David Farrell, Professor of Politics in the School of Politics and International Relations at University College Dublin. He's a specialist in the study of representation, elections, political parties, and deliberative mini-publics. Among his many scholarly publications are Deliberative Mini-Publics from Bristol University Press, Reimagining Democracy, Lessons in Deliberative Democracy from the Irish Frontline, that's from Cornell University Press, and the award-winning Political Parties and Democratic Linkage, How Parties Organize Democracy. Welcome from University College Dublin, Professor Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction, Michael. I hope you can see my screen, so please let me know if you can't. I've shared some slides. I've been having huge computer problems. Yeah, good. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this fascinating panel. Welcome from a reasonably wet Dublin on a 2:30 in the afternoon, so I long ago had my breakfast. I'll try to keep my comments brief. I was asked to talk about the use of this electoral system in Ireland. We call it the single transferable vote, but following Lee's guidance, it's what you would call ranked choice voting, the multi-winner form. And we've used it for a long time. Next year, we celebrate 100 years of the state of Ireland. The establishment of our nation state was in 1922. And we've used this electoral system from the get-go. It was actually something that was bequeathed to us by our colonial masters, the British, when they finally gave us our independence. They were prone to test this electoral system on their colonies. Australia, Malta, other places, and Ireland was there. And we've retained that system ever since. And it's a system that is used. I don't want to go too much into the details, but I suppose one relevant feature is that it's a multi-seat system, the way we use it. So we elect more than one politician in each district. And that in our system, it's usually between 3 or 4 or 5 politicians. So the districts are, by the comparison with other electoral systems in Europe, relatively small. And I'm happy to go into the details in the Q&A later. So I want to make 3 points. I want to talk about how it's a simple system, how it's a system that works, and how it's a system that's popular. Those are my 3 main things I want to develop. So it's a simple system. You have in front of you a ballot paper from our general election last year, the 2020 general election. It's only the top half of the ballot paper. There were, from memory, I think 20 candidates on that ballot paper. And okay, it's written in Irish, so that can confuse you a bit, but it's also in English. But effectively, as a voter, all you have to do is take your pencil. We do things still on paper here in this country, and you rank order the candidates. If you only want to vote for one candidate, you just put a 1 against one candidate's name, and that's the end of your vote. Or you can do 1, 2, 3, or you can do all 20 if you want. It's entirely your choice. And yes, there are complexities in the mechanics of the system, but those complexities are carried out by the professionals in the count centers later on. All the voter needs to know is that they rank order in their order of preference, their preferred candidate. So that's the first thing. It's simple. Voters understand it. Survey data shows this. And as I said, that we've used it for 100 years. So clearly it hasn't produced any problems. And that gets to my second point. This is a system that works. And I'll develop 2 little arguments here in the time that I've got. It works in the sense that it's produced a perfectly stable political party system over 100 years now. We've had single party governments. More recently, since the 1980s, we've always had coalition governments where there's more than one party in the driving seat in the executive. But they're stable parliamentary systems. For the most part, our governments go for 3 or 4 years before there's a general election. In recent times, with the phenomenon of electoral change that we've seen in every country, your country as well as mine and the rest of the developed democracies, of course, things have become a bit more complicated. But the degree of fractionalization, to use the political science jargon, the number of parties in our parliament is still less than you find in many other parliaments in other countries that use proportional representation electoral systems. And one of the reasons for that is because our districts, as I said earlier on, are quite small, 3, 4, or 5 member districts. That puts a lid on the degree of fractionalization. So it works in that sense. It produces pretty stable parliamentary government. And it works in the second sense that it facilitates very good voter-politician linkage. What do I mean by that? There's good contact between the voters and the politicians. Voters know who to go and see, and if they don't particularly like the answer from one politician, well, they can go to the next one because there's more than one politician in their district. And the voters like this. Survey data after survey data shows this. We call our members of parliament TDs, but effectively that's the Irish for member of parliament. So this is just one sample survey question in which it's clear that the voters like it. They like the contact with politicians. Now, there are some critics of this electoral system in Ireland, like anywhere else, that say there's too much contact with politicians, there's too much linkage. But arguably, it's popular with the voters. Arguably, it's not too much. Our politicians still get on with other things in the parliament. And arguably, if it is something that you wanted to change in our country, there are other things one would need to look at other than the electoral system. So what I would be saying here is it facilitates good voter-politician linkage. It's not the cause of it. And again, I'm happy to go into that in the Q&A. And then my final point, before I stop, I've talked about how it's simple. I've talked about how it works. And the third point is it's popular. So it's popular. We've used it for 100 years. Twice in 1959 and again in 1968, governments tried to get rid of it. In our country, if you want to change the electoral system, it has to be by an initiative, by a referendum of the entire population voting. And on both occasions in 1959 and in 1968, particularly in the latter case, the voters said, no, we want to keep this electoral system. And more recently, there were discussions in the heat of our economic crash after 2011. Again, there were discussions from some of the elite politicians about whether we should change our electoral system. There was talk about bringing in the sort of system they use in Germany, for example. And the voters are not persuaded. This, at the best, this shows some degree of support, but it's equivocal. For the most part, the majority support in survey after survey shows that voters like the electoral system. So it's a system I don't see us losing anytime soon, and I heartily recommend it on your good selves, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we still have a good 25 minutes for conversation and questions. And so I've been monitoring some of the questions in the chat, and we'll kind of try to organize them in a way to get us going. But this can be for anyone on the panel. But thanks all for your presentations. Thanks to the audience for the first set of questions, but keep feeling free to ask them in the chat. But the first question, I think, is maybe kind of a two-parter. Some of you have addressed this a bit, especially Professor Benjamin's and Professor Farrell's comments speak to this a little bit. But there are some concerns in the questions about, does ranked choice voting make voting more difficult? We might notice that a lot of the success stories, at least in the US, in the New York case, are in primaries where maybe people are a little more informed and motivated to vote. Would this be something that might be more likely to work generally? And then the second part is more about how we interpret our own confidence in election results. Currently in the United States, we can't seem to have a presidential election with the currently the losing side spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in multiple states to recount the votes over and over, to reinvestigate the process over and over. And that's when there's just a vote for one person with no ranking at all, which is the least complicated way to count the votes. Would introducing ranked choice voting further diminish trust in our electoral administration? So either of those two parts for anyone on the panel. Amy's got her hand up.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to the question of voter confusion, that first of all, there was a lot of effort. I mentioned this with the Secretary of State doing voter education, but also a number of other groups were doing it. And there was work at different community groups and, schools, universities and such, sometimes ranking different beers at pubs, or I remember seeing the New York City doing the pizza toppings. That that sort of thing can happen. But on the other hand, there was a study that I did with some other political scientists of local election officials, the town clerks, where a lot of them reported hearing conversations among voters who were a little bit confused. They weren't so sure how to vote. It's hard to know how prevalent that was. It definitely was used more by Democrats and unenrolled voters, than Republicans, but that may not be confusion. That might just be preference and attitudes towards ranked choice in general. Really what happened in the most high profile use as a general election, 2018 second congressional district race, was that a single vote for Bruce Poliquin, the Republican incumbent, was the most common. That was the plurality vote, kind of vote that was cast. So there were lots of other people who picked maybe just one individual as well. But that's sort of like the way out of voter confusion is to decide to vote for one person. And that, that was available for people as part of ranked choice to not rank. And as I said, it was the most common. I would say just simply on an anecdotal basis that what right now in Maine is the most confusing thing for voters is that it's used for some races and not for others. I don't think there was a problem with people using it when they had ballots with two different ways of voting, but sort of going forward, people are sometimes, ask all these questions. Will it be used in the upcoming governor's race in 2022? The answer is, well, no, not in the, at least not in the general election. And I don't think there are going to be party primaries either. So that's the point of confusion. But I don't think there was confusion, and there was good work that was done for voter education.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
Thanks, Michael. I just add a little bit from around these quarters. Single transfer, this electoral system, ranked choice voting, was introduced in Scotland for their local elections a decade or so ago, and has bedded in perfectly well. And that is in Scotland they use different electoral systems to elect their members of parliament. They use a different electoral system to elect the members of the Scottish Parliament. And then they use ranked choice voting. So they have three different systems that they're using, and yet there's little evidence of confusion, and the system proves to be quite popular there.
So this handles the confusion question. How about trust? If we have to trust that we see the results, and then we see those results change after the ranking is implemented, is there any evidence or any informed speculation the panelists have about how people will come to trust the results of elections in our current political environment? Amy, or I'm sorry, Andrea, did you have something, or I saw David's hand go up too? Whoever would like.
I was just going to say, I mean, obviously people who have been following the New York situation, there was maybe a small snafu where some test data was left in. And so I think that probably wasn't a good plan. I think my speculation is we have gotten so used to rushing to the results. And I think instead of, I think that there's a way, I think they wanted to inform people round by round to sort of be transparent. But then because there was the test data in there, maybe that wasn't a good plan. So maybe I think David answered in the chat that, it does take a while, but we're patient. Like maybe that should be our approach, that it's not the same, and that maybe afterwards there's sort of a report that in round one, it looked like this, we dropped this person, round two, it looked like, instead of trying to rush to be right, when mistakes can still be made. So then hopefully, but I think like anything, it'll probably just take time that people get used to it. David, I know I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I completely agree. It perhaps needs a bit more patience than people might be accustomed to. But the themes are, full transparency and taking the voters through it round by round so that everyone can see what's going on. And indeed in Ireland, it makes for great TV because it means that we can see after each round the latest state of play and who's getting closer to being elected. There's absolutely no doubt. There's no question mark over the fairness of the process because it's fully transparent. It just takes a bit longer.
I see a couple questions in the chat related to a current proposal in the Wisconsin legislature to adopt RCV for congressional races. Jeff Mandel of Law Forward is asking, is there a good argument to use this for only some elections? And then maybe if there is a training wheels approach, why not start at local or state levels first? Anyone? Bueller?
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, I think, to continue on the theme of the previous question, people, there's some training that does have to occur, when people are doing a transitioning to a new system. But generally, the New York City poll that Andrea mentioned, is consistent with experience in other cities, in which voters mostly say, turned out it was pretty simple. And I've seen a number of surveys that show that the more people use ranked choice voting, the more they get used to it. And I bet if David came and voted in an election in the United States, he'd be like, why do I only get to vote for one? That's just so weird. So it's just a matter of what you're used to. And as voters get used to ranking, they tend to like it. So, I mean, as for a training wheels approach, I mean, I guess you could do that. That seems more politically feasible. I mean, I do feel, like sometimes we have a conversation about reform as this incremental thing at the same time that it feels like American democracy is on the precipice of this sort of chaotic, potential collapse. And I mean, I think I feel more of a sense of urgency that we need some rather big transformative reforms and we need them fast. But I get the instinct to kind of roll things out steadily so that people start to learn and get comfortable with them.
Amy.
Yeah, on the training wheels question, one thing I left out of the Maine experience is that, in fact, Portland, Maine, the largest city in Maine, although really rather small place, only 60,000 people, did use ranked choice voting before the state did in municipal elections starting in 2011. So there was some experience of it in the state. And I think that might have added to some comfort, at least among some people. However, I don't think that's a really good reason to necessarily adopt it in that way, because for one thing, voters don't pay as close attention a lot of times to these municipal races. They're not going to know necessarily every single candidate who's running for city council or, running for mayor. Their rankings are still going to be based on probably the top, maybe 3 candidates or so, And, the ones that people pay more attention to are these larger races. So if you want voters to learn a lot about candidates and use that in their rankings and their, vote choices, then why not go for larger scale races to begin with?
A question that's come up a couple times in the chat relates to governing after ranked choice voting. So this may be for our panelist who is in the country with 100 years experience with this behavior, but for anybody who wants to answer, is there evidence that there's more compromise in legislatures or more functional legislatures when we have ranked choice voting?
I might have. It's a difficult one. There's because there is that argument that if you have an electoral system like a ranked choice voting system, that has the risk that you end up with a parliament, a legislature that is less cohesive. because the politicians are chasing two masters. They're looking after their voters, but they're also looking at the party elite. But the evidence can be quite mixed. And indeed, in Ireland, we have one of the most cohesive parliaments in Europe by any measure. And so the explanation for what makes a parliament incohesive may be less to do with the electoral system and more to do with the culture of the politics in the country. So I don't have a very strong answer. All I can say is that we use RCV and we have a very stable parliamentary system.
Anyone else on the potential for RCV and better legislative governance?
Well, I mean, I think part of the challenge is to understand why our Congress and why our governing system is so broken right now. And I mean, to me, a lot of that is that we have a set of governing institutions that require a large deal of compromise, and we have a majoritarian electoral system that really creates very strong pressures and incentives for parties to demonize and cast the other party as extreme, and on top of this urban rural polarization in which the parties are just really divided by geography, by race, by identity, by culture, and you can't expect a governing system that requires a certain amount of compromise and coalition building to work when you have a party system in which both sides are trying to crush the other side out of submission and view the other side governing as an existential threat. So to the extent that ranked choice voting can help reduce some of that animosity, I think that's valuable. But again, as long as we maintain single winner districts, you're still going to basically have the same two-party system. So until we get to proportional districts I think with ranked choice voting, but I mean, I feel more passionate about having proportional representation, having more parties as the most important thing. I mean, that's the thing that's going to break the binary. And if you look at the comparative political science research, you find that the U.S. among advanced democracies has the highest level of out-party animosity and hatred, and there's a pretty clear correlation between the proportionality and the number of parties and the reduction in out-party demonization. And part of that is because when parties go into government with each other and have different coalitions, it's there's less of this, the other party is my permanent enemy. Also, when people are spatially segregated by partisanship, it becomes much easier to demonize people who are just distant and far, and you're surrounded by people who are on the same side of this war. And also, there's just something about the human psychology that it is very prone to demonization when we're in an us versus them binary context. That just when there's multiple sides, you say, how can we have a multi-ethnic democracy? Well, New York City, right? I mean, is one of the most diverse places in the world. I mean, and New York City is not at war because there's a lot of diversity, But when you have a binary system in which one side fears that the other side is about to take total control and use that power to make to crush it, then you have political instability. I mean, this is something that the framers understood is fundamental to Madison Federalist number 10. This is something that political scientists in the 60s and 70s were really hung up on, the idea of cross-cutting cleavages, that in order to have political stability, you needed to have people who had different allegiances that pointed them in different directions. And that things should be, and we talk about complexity, but I mean, frankly, things should be a little complicated, because when things are a little complicated, it forces us to think. When things are too simple, it doesn't push us to think and to engage, and it just allows us to engage in a very simplistic binary good versus evil, us versus them way of thinking. Politics should be about thinking. So that's my disquisition.
Thank you, Lee. I think mentioning a Federalist 10 earns you a free tote bag from the American Political Science Association, so look for that in the mail. One point you mentioned a couple of times related to the kind of out-party animosity and the desire to crush the other side, and especially when maybe one party is relatively in charge of governing in a state, they can do that more easily. One structural factor that might interact with reforms like we're talking about today is redistricting. And of course, that's also happening now. And I'm curious, there are a couple questions in the chat and/or Q&A about this, but what do people think about how something like redistricting interacts with a reform like ranked choice voting or multi-member districts? Are these enough, or do we need to be thinking even bigger?
Well, I mean, the whole problem of gerrymandering is fundamentally driven by the single member district with plurality which leads to just two parties. And when you have predictable partisan voting with single member districts, it gives partisan legislatures the ability to draw 100,000 maps and then pick the one that helps their side the most. But as you increase the size of districts, the value of drawing districts goes down. I mean, with proportional representation, it doesn't districting doesn't matter, right? With single member districts, where voters live is incredibly important. Single member districts, mean that some voters are more important than other. If you live in a lopsided district, as basically 85% of Wisconsinites do and 85% of Americans do, you have no voting power. It doesn't matter that one party is going to win. Your vote is irrelevant. As you have proportional multi-member districts, then suddenly your vote matters wherever you live, because you can contribute to electing a candidate of your choice. You don't have to live in a swing district. So the more proportional the system, the more gerrymandering is just irrelevant. So if you want to get rid of gerrymandering, you got to get rid of the single member district. I mean, that's just a basic logic of it. So to the extent that ranked choice voting interacts with that, as long as if anybody is serious about ending gerrymandering, they need to be serious about ending the single member district. And so any proposal that keeps the single member district is going to keep gerrymandering and going to keep most voters voting in lopsided districts where their votes don't matter. And so it doesn't matter if you do primary reform, doesn't matter if you do ranked choice voting, as long as you're keeping the single member district, you're basically treating most voters as though their vote doesn't matter, and keeping politics in a hyperpolarized binary zero-sum situation that is a fundamental threat to U.S. democracy. So yes, I have strong views on that.
Would anyone else like to weigh in? Yeah, David.
I mean, I would just agree. I mean, we don't have that problem. And going back to some of Lee's other comments, I think the important thing is the multi-seat notion, the multi-winner form. That probably is the most important thing if you really want to make a change. In political science literature, there's talk about the sweet spot. And the sweet spot, I think most people would accept, is you want multi-seat districts. You want to elect more than one, member of the parliament within in a district, but you want to keep a limit on that. And the Irish 3, 4, or 5 seat districts is generally seen as a decent sweet spot. So it means things just don't go crazy. You get multi-seat systems, you get a more consensual system, but it doesn't become too pluralized.
As is often Amy, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I would just point out the obvious that, this whole issue doesn't apply when it comes to statewide races. So, you can then say, what does ranked choice voting do with governor's races, Senate races? Do you end up with candidates or at least, winners who cooperate with each other and work together? I think right now the jury is a bit out on it, but we have seen in the governor's race in 2018, a pretty centrist Democrat winning the primary, and then ultimately also winning the general election.
Thank you. As is often the case in Wisconsin audiences, there are some pretty informed questions with high participators, and one is relating to seeking out the panelists' opinion on how we might do this in Wisconsin. And so there are lots of different ways to tally ranked ballots. What do you all think might be the best in Wisconsin? Some of the options offered are instant runoff or ranked pairs, or might there be another one? This one I think comes from Carl in our chat. How should we do this?
Well, again, I think the multi-winner system is the best, and I mean there are a few ways to do that. I mean, I actually would defer to David. I mean, there are different quota, different sort of formulations for how you translate that. But I think the most important thing is the focus on proportional multi-seat districts. I think 5 is probably the sweet spot. I'm convinced by that research as well. And again, the most important thing is that when you do that, every vote matters equally. I mean, if you care about political equality and you care about representation, you want every vote to matter equally, and every voter to have a stake. And so there are some technical different ways you can do that technically. If you want to use the hair quota or the droop quota, I'm sure David has stronger opinions on that, but I think the key is proportional multi-seat districts.
Well, we are about out of time, but since we have about 2 or 3 minutes left, I mean, everybody did get to make a presentation, and maybe it's clear to some of our panel or to some of our audience where our panelists lie on different perspectives about RCV and other kinds of electoral reforms in Wisconsin, and more generally, just very quickly, maybe a lightning round final question for everyone. If you could make one reform to the electoral system in the U.S., what would you choose? And to give folks time to think, maybe we'll start with Lee, since I think I know what he might say. To be quick, but then everybody maybe pretend that we're on television with a hard out, so with a relatively quick answer, if you can.
Yeah. Well, I think multi-seat RCV. I think David's advice is incredibly valuable, and I mean, look at Ireland. It's been very successful there, and I think that's what we ought to adopt. And again, I think when we're thinking about this, the question is, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? And I think in the U.S. it's pretty clear that we are in a moment of incredibly dangerous hyperpartisanship driven by the urban rural ethnic cultural divide in our politics, and unless we can adopt a reform that both addresses that and elevates political equality, we're just tinkering at the margins and wasting our time.
Now I hand the magic wand to Andrea Benjamin.
Sure, I'm gonna be rogue and say I think all of these reforms are interesting, and obviously I care a lot about them, but for me right now, the step that needs to take place is the one before that, which is reducing the barriers to people voting, restoring voting rights, mobilizing voters, seeing an increase in turnout, and then maybe we can tinker with sort of the rules that determine the winner. But right now, we just don't even have the level of engagement that I think is reflective of a democracy. So.
I will take a point of personal privilege and tout research led by a graduate student from our program, former graduate student from our program, Jordan Foley, who recently led an article from our center looking at disparities in time spent in line to vote and distance from the polling places in Wisconsin, which systematically are greater burdens for Black voters and Hispanic voters in our state. That's the same point. Thank you so much for that, Andrea. Amy Freed.
I'm going to chime in more with Andrea's kind of thing as well and say automatic voter registration and other kinds of reforms that make it easier for people to vote, while acknowledging that even if people can vote, if the districts are drawn in, in ways that really benefit one party over another, there's not going to be true competitiveness. So we shouldn't lose track of that as well.
Thank you, Amy. And David Farrell.
I agree with everyone else. I mean, particularly to go for both. Go for administrative reform so everyone can vote, and go for electoral reform so that the vote can have real meaning.
And I endorse Andrea's. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I mean, we need to have basic voting rights for everyone in this country, but we also and then we need to make sure that their votes count equally.
For the panel or for the audience, Barry Burden, the director of the Elections Research Center, has an op-ed in the Cap Times about ranked choice voting that might be worth a look. It's an interesting piece that relates to a lot of the issues we talked about today. And there's also a piece in the Washington Post, I think by Brian Klaas, about a variety of voting reforms, encouraging Americans to shoot for the moon and also move more incrementally at the same time. So some interesting comments out there in the news ecology for us to consider on these important topics. So thank you so much to Lee Drutman, Andrea Benjamin, Amy Freed, David Farrell. Thanks to Nils Ringe and the Jean Monnet Center for putting this together, and all of the other folks who helped co-sponsor that, and to Levi Bankston, who did all of the important behind the scenes and technology work for this event as well, and to our partners at WisPolitics for having this live longer on the web, and to all of you for being our audience today. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day as engaged citizens.